If simple water molecules that form ice crystals exhibit magnificent structure, consider the design ingenuity behind large, complex molecules, such as DNA. DNA contains the blueprint for all life and is by far the densest information storage mechanism known in the universe. For example, the amount of information contained in a pinhead volume of DNA would fill a stack of books 500 times higher than from here to the moon. The program code and design of such an incredible system indicates a supremely intelligent designer.
The evidence to me that just cries out that there's a God is the study of DNA. DNA is a very powerful, massive information storage system. In fact, DNA that makes up our genes actually is like books of information that's read by a language system. It's absolutely phenomenal. And scientists know today that languages, a code, only come from an intelligence, and information only comes from information. Nobody's ever seen matter by itself give rise to a code. Nobody's ever seen matter by itself give rise to information. And as you look at DNA, it actually cries out, in the beginning, God created the universe.
We all begin as a single cell the size of a period at the end of a sentence. How does that cell know how to build a body with 100 trillion cells in it, thousands of different kinds, and each one of them is so complex, nanochemical machinery beyond our comprehension how it works, and encoded is the instruction manual. It's the manufacturer's manual how to build and operate every part of this incredible body made up of 100 trillion cells.
Furthermore, DNA is a three-dimensional molecule that is self-replicating. Each molecule is able to make an identical copy quickly and efficiently. The Lord has even programmed DNA to detect and correct replication errors. These sophisticated capabilities far exceed man's means.
God has created the DNA molecule in such a way that it is self-correcting. There are special proteins called enzymes that go up and down the DNA molecule looking for and making repairs on a minute-by-minute, second-by-second basis. God created us with a DNA code that actually has what we call editase or editorial type enzymes. Just as an editor reads a newspaper or a book looking for mistakes, so God has created special enzymes that go up and down our DNA molecule, repairing the mistakes in ways that are unbelievably complex.
There are many examples in creation of things that demonstrate the biblical God. One would be in our very DNA. Our DNA has information in it. And there is a whole field of scientific study called information science, which studies how information originates, how it's transmitted, and so on. And one of the laws of information science says that information never originates by itself in matter, never spontaneously comes about. Anytime we trace the copying of information back to its source, it always comes back to a mind. And since we have creative information in DNA, that tells me that DNA comes from intelligence. It's not something that could possibly come about through millions of years of mutations and natural selection. That just won't work.
Yet even the DNA molecule is simple compared to cells. All life consists of cells, and each cell functions as a miniature city. When we consider that a human body consists of trillions of cells working together as one unit, we should be in humble awe of our Creator's intimate care and perfect wisdom.
Look at the people around you, and for a moment think about their characteristics. In fact, the color of their eyes, hair, skin, height, facial features, skeletal shape, and countless details in their internal organs, brain, nerves, and muscles are all recorded in the DNA. DNA is like an information recording system or a database in your body. This database saves information about the cell in which it is placed and about all the other cells in your body. The first cell, which forms when the sperm and the egg are joined, also forms the first copy of DNA molecule, which will carry the code in every cell of person's body right up until death. DNA is a molecule of considerable size. If you remember that the average size of a cell is smaller than 100th of a millimeter, then you would know that we are talking about something far more smaller than that. The DNA is carefully protected within the nucleus of a cell, and this molecule is the information bank of human body as it contains the genes. The first cell then divides and multiplies in the light of the program recorded in the DNA. So the tissues and organs begin to form. This is the beginning of a human being. The coordination of this complex structuring is brought by the DNA molecule. The word قدره, translated as proportioned in the mentioning verse, comes from the Arabic verb قدر. It translates as arranging, setting out, planning, programming, or the writing of everything in destiny by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Bearing in mind that the structure of DNA was unraveled by Francis Crick in 1953, it is truly amazing that the Quran pointed to the concept of genetic planning in an age when the mankind's knowledge was very limited. This remarkable fact again proves that the Quran is the word of Almighty Creator. The amount of information contained in a DNA is amazing. If we compare a human body to a building, in fact all the predetermined information of this building can be found in the DNA, even if this information is as tiny as an atom. In addition to all the physical characteristics, thousands of different processes taking place in the cell and the body, and indeed the control of the whole system, are recorded in the DNA. The scientists have provided different theories to describe the amount of information contained in a DNA. To know the amount of the recorded information in the DNA, suppose that we write all those information in books and pile them up. The height of it would reach to some 70 meters. Or if a person would type about 8 hours per day with a speed of 60 words per minute, it would take 50 years for him to type all those information.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer. You might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer, and that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe.
In recent days, the discoveries about DNA in the cell, it has formed a very complex picture. So complex that it has led you to posit that the only place it could come from is from an intelligent designer. Talk a little bit about that and what you're finding in DNA.
Well, as we talked about in our last program, DNA encodes digital information. It's a form of digital nanotechnology. And the information in the DNA directs the construction of the proteins and protein machines that are necessary for the cell to stay alive. And this, I think, has reframed the ancient question about design, because in the 19th century, with Darwin's theory, it was thought that he had explained away all evidence of design. And now we have a striking appearance of design that has no, at this point, naturalistic explanation. And I think there's also a positive reason to think that it was designed by an intelligence. But it's interesting, I think, for our purposes at this point, just to acknowledge that this is a huge mystery. I call it the DNA enigma. Richard Dawkins, who denies that there's any evidence of design, nonetheless has to acknowledge that DNA is full of digital code. He says that the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. Bill Gates goes on to say that DNA is like a software program, only much more complex than any we've ever created. So what we're dealing with inside the cell is information, and that raises a really profound mystery, because we know we need information to build all the important components of the cell. So if you want to explain the origin of the first cell, the origin of life, you have to account for the origin of information. And there's a German scientist named Bernd Olaf Küppers who acknowledged this connection early on. He said that the question of the origin of life is basically equivalent to the question of the origin of biological information. And that makes sense too, because I used to ask my students a question: if you want to give your computer a new function, what do you have to give it? And they would know right away. You got to give it code, information, software. And the same thing is true in life. There's a connection between information and new form and function. And if you want to get a functional living organism off the ground, you got to have that information. So that's the DNA enigma. That's the big mystery that has to be solved.
And it's a lot of information. It's not just a few things. It's a lot of things in a lot of different parts that are all programmed to work together. It's very complex.
It's lines and lines of code. I mean, in the human genome, you've got 3 billion characters. In lower animals, somewhat less, but it's an amazing amount of information in every living organism.
This has been an ATRI production.
In the field of genetics, today we have come to know that it is the sperm which is responsible for determining the sex of the child. And today science tells us that the 23rd pair of chromosomes in the human being, it determines the sex of the child. If it's XX, it's a female. If it's XY, then it's a male. So it is the sperm which is responsible for determining the sex. If the X of the sperm takes part in the fertilization, then a female is born. If the Y takes part, then a male is born. And this is exactly what the Quran says in Surah Najm, chapter number 53. Verse number 45 and 46, that we have created the human being from a minute quantity of liquid which is ejaculated. Minute quantity of liquid, ejaculated means it has to be a male fluid. The similar message is repeated in Surah Qiyamah, chapter number 75, verse number 37 to 39, that we have created the human being from a minute quantity of sperm. Nutfatun min mani yumna. We have created the human being from minute quantity of sperm, then made it into an alaka, then made the alaka into mudga, then gave it sex, male and female. So the Quran says that the sperm is responsible for the sex of the child, whether it's male or female. In this country of ours, this great country, India, for reasons known best to the Indians, in India mainly, most of the people, they prefer having sons rather than daughters. And if a lady gives birth to a daughter, very often the mother-in-law, she will blame the daughter-in-law. That why did you give birth to a daughter? According to the science and the Quran, if the mother-in-law has to blame anyone, she should not blame the daughter-in-law, she should blame the son. Because it is the male fluid which is responsible for deciding the sex of the child, male or female. Actually, it's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one who makes it male or female. But if the mother-in-law has to blame anyone, she should blame the son. Because he is responsible for the sex of the child, male or female.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا أقسم بيوم القيامة ولا أقسم بالنفس اللوامة أيحسب الإنسان أن لن نجمع عظامه بلى قادرين على أن نسوي بنانه بل يريد الإنسان ليفجر أمامه يسأل أيان يوم القيامة فإذا برق البصر وخسف القمر وجمع الشمس والقمر يقول الإنسان يومئذ أين المفر كلا لا وزر إلى ربك يومئذ المستقر ينبأ الإنسان يومئذ بما قدم وأخر بل الإنسان على نفسه بصيرة ولو ألقى معاذيره لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه فإذا قرأناه فاتبع قرآنه ثم إن علينا بيانه كلا بل تحبون العاجلة وتذرون الآخرة وجوه يومئذ ناظرة إلى ربها ناظرة ووجوه يومئذ باسرة تظن أن يفعل بها فاقرة كلا إذا بلغت التراقي وقيل من راق وظن أنه الفراق والتفت الساق بالساق إلى ربك يومئذ المساق فلا صدق ولا صلى ولكن كذب وتولى ثم ذهب إلى أهله يتمطى أولى لك فأولى ثم أولى لك فأولى أيحسب الإنسان أن يترك سدى ألم يكن نطفة من مني يمنى ثم كان علقة فخلق فسوى فجعل منه الزوجين الذكر والأنثى أليس ذلك بقادر على